This video will cover the topic of measures of center. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question to guide our video will be, how do we use measures of center to represent our sample data? When we are collecting data, we want to make sure that we have created a random sample. So we're going to make sure we have that every time. We want to make sure that our data is valid and representative of the group we are using. And then we need to figure out the best way to present the data. And one way is to use a measure of center. And the measures of center are the mean, the median, and the mode. These are all different representations that statisticians use to say what is the norm. The question is, which one do we use and which one is best going to represent our information? We'll take a look at an example and I'll show you a little bit about the decision making we use. So here's our example. We want to know how many minutes a day 7th graders at our school use Snapchat. So rather than ask every 7th grader at our school, we're going to assign each 7th grader a number, use a random generator, choose 15 of those numbers on the random generator, and collect data from those 15 students. They can check their phone where it will tell them how much time they've logged into Snapchat. And let's say they go ahead and share these minutes that I've listed below. Since we did a random survey, we can feel pretty confident that our results are valid. Which means the question becomes, how should we synthesize our data? How do we boil it down to a typical number for each student or for our total student population? To produce just one number that represents the average, we could use either the mean, the median, or the mode. These are all different measures of center. So the mean, of course, is where we add up all of the data values. We'd add all 15 values, and then we would divide by the number of pieces of data. So in this case, we would divide by 15. The median is another option, and that's like the middle person. All right, the data from that middle person here. But to do that, we would need to make sure first that these are ordered from least to greatest, which at the moment they are not. And the mode probably takes the least amount of work here. The mode is what we would do if we just wanted to look at which thing happens the most often, which piece of data repeats more often than any other. So we're going to do the calculations for each of these with the data that I have above. So we're going to look at the number of minutes that students reported from our sample group. And if we add up all of the minutes, I'm going to do the calculations for us, right? I'm just adding up 34 plus 45 plus 22, etc. And if I add that all up, and you can double check my work here, but if I add those all up, I get 476 total minutes, but then I'm going to divide that by 15. And again, I'm kind of doing my calculations on the side here, but when I do that, I get about 31.73. It keeps going. But that means on average, it's about 32 minutes per day for our sample group of students. So that's one of our measures of center taken care of. The mean is about 32. Now let's take a look at the median. And to do that, we're going to need to put all of our numbers in order from least to greatest. So go ahead and make sure you have a table there where the numbers are going from least to greatest. And once you have them in least to greatest, you're going to try to find that middle piece of data. And I'm crossing these off one by one, but since I also know there are 15 pieces of data, I know that I'm looking for the middle where there's an equal number on each side. So there's going to be 7 on either side of this piece of data here. So the median, it looks like, is 28. Which brings us to the mode, which is a pretty quick one here. We're looking for the one that appears the most often. And I look and I notice that 0 is the only one that repeats at all. I'm double checking that here. But yeah, 0 is the only one that appears more than once, so that is the mode. And you might already be looking at that and thinking, that doesn't really represent the data very well. So that brings us to our next question of when should we use one of the measures over the other? And that's what we're going to look at in the next section here. So basically the question is, how do we choose, right? Which one of these is going to be the best representation? They're all 3 different measures of center. They've all come from the same data. but how do we know which one best reflects the information and summarizes it the best? Let's start by thinking about when the mean might be appropriate. And honestly, the mean is what we kind of use a lot, right? It's a pretty preferred method because it takes all of the data into account, right? It doesn't leave anybody out of the process. So it takes every piece of information. However, sometimes the median is used for one big reason that is a flaw for the mean. The median is preferred over the mean when there are extremes or outliers in the data that might skew the mean. For example, if in our original data collection, one of the students reported using Snapchat 600 minutes a day, that is an outlier, an extreme outlier, and it would really alter the mean. It would no longer be a good representation. In fact, if I use this 600 instead of one of the zeros, right, if this 600 gets thrown in, that actually changed the mean all the way up to 72 minutes, which would be crazy compared to what our other mean was, right? So in that example, we wouldn't want to use that. The mode doesn't get used as much in these pieces of data collections. There's kind of one big exception. And that is when data is collected kind of on a scale, like you say, rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how much you use Snapchat. It is not particularly good for questions like our example, where it's kind of open-ended numerical. Because again, thinking of our example, that data had a mode of 0, and that is definitely not representative. It does not show an accurate picture. 2 people happen to say 0, but that does not reflect the rest of the students whatsoever, right? So that mode is probably not a great choice for this one. So thinking back on our scenario, right, we had a great random sample. The data didn't have any large outliers. And the numerical answers were open-ended, right? We weren't telling people to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 or anything like that, right? So it meant that the mean was our best choice here. So now let's make our claim. And in this case, our claim would be that 7th graders at our school, right? We only checked to 7th graders and we're only talking about our school. So 7th graders at our school typically spent about 32 minutes on Snapchat because that was the mean of the data that we got when we did our random sample involving 7th graders from our school. And remember, the essential question of this video was how we could best represent our data from our sample using measures of center. And we're going to use the mean a lot. There'll be times we use other forms as well, but the mean is what we used in this case because it was the best representation. Be sure to have your notes and any questions ready with you in class.